G'day, Uncle Leon. How you going, mate?
Good, mate. It's been a very, very big week for me. What about yourself?
Yeah, pretty big week for me as well. We're doing this a day late. I had one person comment today, said, "Where's my podcast this week?" And I said, "Mate, it's about to be recorded in an hour and 30 minutes time. You just got to wait and hold your horses." How
And
you
that's
feeling?
the good thing is, quality content always just sometimes takes that extra little bit of time.
That's right. It's it's Wednesday today, Leon. We usually do this on a Tuesday, but you just got back to the beautiful sunny state of Western Australia yesterday?
Yesterday morning,
yeah. So you've been away, mate. You've been on the East Coast.
Been going hard. Been having a good time. So flew out to Melbourne Friday morning, had an evening there, and then I was at the guitar show in Melbourne Saturday and Sunday, and Ragdoll did 2 shows. And on top of that, we also ended up seeing Striper on Sunday night because they just happened to be in town. And their tour manager came to our show on Saturday and so hooked us up with some door spots, which is always a nice feeling, and then had some work with one of our songwriting clients. And when I mean I mean you and me. So over there in Melbourne, it was good to catch up with them, and then back on the plane on Tuesday. So yeah, I was pretty wiped yesterday after all of that. There was just a lot going on. It all went pretty well. It was considering all the logistics involved, it ran very, very smoothly.
Well, I'm surprised you because we went out to see Striper in Perth last night as well. So you got off a plane, you had a little bit of time at home, and then just back in the saddle, go see some live music.
Well, Troy, I always remember, I think the first year we went to the States, I came home and did nothing for about a month and got really, really depressed. But you got home and you just like immediately were catching up with people, like the day you were back, like showing people your new guitar, hanging out.
Oh yeah, I did do that.
So I always try to take the Tondi approach to getting back from a trip, which is where you make sure you do something. So
that's nice to hear. Thank you.
It was, obviously nice to get home and see the cats and see my wife, who
wife.
Exactly. All suffering warden of the podcast. And yeah, we decided, hey, why not? What else are we going to do? And she obviously didn't come on the trip, so it was a great opportunity for her to see the show. Striper, by the way, were amazing.
Good band.
A band I was very vaguely aware of via the kind of, the standard catchphrases, which are Christian metal, Michael Sweet, Oz Fox. That's pretty much all I knew about Striper. And that Soldiers song.
Soldiers Under Command?
Yeah, which is
that's
when
some
you're
good stuff.
Doing what we do, where we are 15 years old in 2004 and downloading stuff from Kazaa.
Yep.
Oh, actually, I was 15 in technically in 2004 I was still 15. So
I was
you get
16,
Soldiers Under
turning
Command,
17. So
you don't realize that it's a song with a bit of a message, but it doesn't matter because it's awesome and it's full of guitar. So yeah, they were a very good live band.
Yeah, I listened to them when I was like way into 80s rock music in around 2004, 2005. And it's not so much for the message, so much as you say, it's cool music and cool guitar solos, and he's got a crazy high voice. And they had some real, that's like Soldiers Under Command is a great song. And To Hell with the Devil, Free, they had some bangers. So
yeah, they were just amazing. It was Cam had mentioned, so our drummer Cam, for anyone who's unaware of who this mysterious Cam character is, who will pop up at parts of this podcast, he'd seen them on the Kiss Cruise and said he knew nothing about them, but they blew him away. So when we found out they were there, we just kind of said, hey, we've got, we had an afternoon show on the Sunday, so we were finished at 7:30. So we just kind of stumbled over to that, and it was awesome. 170 Russell on Lygon Street in Melbourne. Melbourne was pumping as well. We were there in August. We did a show at the Prince in St Kilda. It was a really good show, but the Melbourne really, out of all the cities in Australia, had the most number of days under lockdown, and people were kind of shell shocked, and still things were emerging and reopening. Whereas this time it just was kind of being back to its best. It's for anyone familiar with Australia, Melbourne and Sydney are very much the dominant kind of cities in terms of population. It feels like, if you want to go and have a real, career in things that people have careers in. You move to Sydney if you want to have a pretty wicked time and experience a lot of urban culture, then you go and do it in Melbourne. So, and it's probably one of the few cities in Australia that actually kind of has a rock scene and a lot of venues. And yeah, the shows were really good, and caught up with a bunch of people I haven't seen for a little while, and got to obviously do that along with the guitar show, and basically just meet a bunch of people who I've only ever known via their email signatures. So it was kind of a big...
That's cool.
I'm sure it's, I've never been to the NAMM show, but it's the way everyone who goes to the NAMM show describes it, where it's just about the hang.
Yep.
And listening to every single riff in the key of E ever recorded at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of an experience. So I'm sure anyone who's ever been to a guitar show or a NAMM show would definitely know what I'm talking about there.
Yeah.
What about you, mate? How's your weekend?
I think I just did a lot of gigs, man. Is that all I did this week? I think it was busy. I think I had 4 this week. 4, maybe 3. No, it was 3 gigs. 3 gigs in a recording session. But yeah, it was fun, man. Another gig with the Synergy, which has been nice because you know this. Like, I do predominantly duo stuff, so it's not really dragging amps along. But to have 3 weeks in a row where I've been able to play with an actual band has been kind of a luxury. So it was nice to play that. And was this
with a friend of the podcast, Nick Delena?
Yep, he was singing. It was a fun. It was just like a wedding sort of thing, but it was pretty good. It was just 2 sets. 2 sets with band and then a couple sets of duo. And yeah, that was fine. So yeah, man, just another weekend in the books. And yeah, back to it this week. It's Monday public holiday for us, so that was nice. Got to spend some time with the family because that's the difference between now and like 10 years ago, where I can't just be out till all hours of the night and then working and playing guitar and never being home. I have a bit of a not deadline. I have a bit of a purpose to be home at a reasonable hour. So I try, and if I work on too much in the weekends, and I try and have a day during the week to be at home. So that was good. And yeah, man, like it's been pretty cool. I've been messing around with some more studio guitar recording stuff, nerdy stuff. I think I've demonstrated that to you. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later today.
Very, very nice.
But yeah,
some very cool. I was going to say some really cool stuff that I actually got to see at the guitar show, but maybe the coolest thing was something that wasn't there, which is the new Boogie that's just announced, the Mark.
Oh.
Not the Mark 6.
No.
Not the Mark 6, because that would be too predictable. The Mark 7.
Yeah.
Did you check out the website and the videos and stuff like that?
So I watched the Fluff video this morning, and I was just watching a bit of the John Bollinger video as well before we jumped on to talk, because it came up on YouTube and I needed to check the audio feed, and that was a way of doing it. And it looks pretty cool. Did you know it was coming out, or was it a surprise?
I'd seen rumors that they were coming out. They've kind of been teasing a new Mark series amp.
Well, like when was the Mark 5? That was like 2010 or 12 or something. It's been a while.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, and the Mark 4 was early 90s before that. So you kind of get a Mark series album about as often as you get a Tool album these days.
Yep.
A Mark series album. Yeah, the amp done an album. Get a new Mark series amp release. And obviously the 5 came out, and then they've done various iterations of it. Like there's the 535 and the 525.
The JP one as well.
The JP2C, obviously, which is still probably, the 4 and the JP2C are different enough feature-wise, but you can get them to sound pretty much exactly the same.
Right.
Like so much of this stuff. But, I feel like the JP2C is, if someone wanted that sound, if you want Dream Theater, Metallica, Stryper, John Sykes, that's probably the one you should get if you want a new one. And it's got stuff like 2 graphic EQs and the shred switch.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very much, it's maybe getting a sound from a Mark series amp is never easy if you don't know what you're doing, but it's sort of like maybe the most straightforward.
Yeah, right. Because in terms of that, like, I think I get what a Mark series is supposed to sound like now, but like that's taken years, man. Like I've only had them in the studio a few times, like people have brought them through, and I'd say the people that have had them have only sort of understood how they work. And then if you go into it really not understanding how the tone stack works and all that sort of stuff, it's like it's hard. But like, you know, the Synergy 2C Plus module, like played with that a little bit and watched your videos and watched a bunch of other videos related to the boogie thing to work out what it is. And then it's like, oh, okay, this is actually, I wouldn't say it's not hard, but it makes sense. And I can appreciate that tone a little bit more now and the way to dial it in. So yeah, it's this new version. Is there anything about, I mean, there's other features and stuff. In terms of dialing it in, is it still the same sort of architecture, and is there anything different?
It's still a Mark.
Yep.
You know, that seems to be the thing where 3 channels, MIDI, and you know, obviously it's interesting looking at the different revisions because I've got a Mark 4B, I think, and there's no MIDI on it. There's no reactive load. There's no built-in IRs or anything like that. You know, it's got a lot of stuff going on, but it's very much something that you can see was designed in the early 90s as something you put in a rack with a bunch of other gear. So you go on tour and that's your, or, you know, you use it in a rack in your studio or as your kind of session beast for all the different tones. So yeah, I guess the very brief sweeping overview is, you know, the original Marks were, well, whether it's heavily modified or it's just, you know, a collection of mods done to a Princeton, that's sort of the Mark 1. So it's a you know, but it's a foundational thing in the realm of guitar amplifiers, you know, the cascading gain stages, and the original combos were crammed in these tiny little chassis. And things with, you know, really super heavy duty speakers. So you have this tiny little amp, but you could play it with a live band, and, you know, lots of people were using them, but I always just think Mark series and I think of Carlos Santana, like Mark 1, that's that sound, that big bloomy, you know, dare I say, most people would associate that sound with a Dumble now.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And obviously not the same, but, you know, there's a lot of, I guess, maybe not overlap, let's say convergent evolution with the cascading gain stages. And, you know, a lot of people use boogies with EV12s, and, you know, Dumbles did that as well. So it's kind of that's a bit of a sound. But then, you know, the Mark II was this different animal, and you had the different revisions and graphics. It seems to be it seems to be they just kind of made them more aggressive sounding with certain revisions. And then, you know, you had the mythical Mark II C+. Mythical because, you know, hey, Metallica used it. John Petrucci, you know, probably owns every second one ever made at this point. And, you know, there was still, I guess the Synergy module represents it very well because it's still kind of a single channel thing where you have to dial it in with one set of EQ. And,
that's I think it was trade-off. I think it was like watching the Fryette video when he talks about like what the module is. And it's, if I'm correct in saying, it's a single channel with a gain stage like placed on top of it, kind of like, I guess maybe in a bastard way saying it, like using a distortion pedal or something incorporated into the circuit, which is not to discount the way it sounds at all, but it's like, you'd certainly dial it in differently if it was a different sort of circuit. So and then you've got the threes, which people swear by, and again, that's like a kind of a subtle evolution, but the Mark IV is kind of I guess the most pushy-pulley, you know, there's all these push-pull pots on it, and there's a graphic, there's all the different switching options. You've got the effects loop, the ability to simulclass it, which is a thing. Okay, well, 2 things. Firstly, can you just explain what the simulclass thing is?
My very, very bad understanding of it is that you actually have 2 types of tubes at the same time.
Oh, I see, right.
I think. Look, this, without being, we don't want to disseminate false information on here. So while we're talking about this, and I also checked earlier and meant to say Michael Sweet is going to be 60 years old.
Wow.
And sounds amazing still.
Yeah. Didn't quite go for all the high notes, but you can forgive him when you're, you know, that age.
60 years old.
Like, the voice isn't made to hold up to sing those notes at that age, unfortunately.
Yeah, and if you think of maybe Tom Brady will still be pretty good at 60, but if you're like a sports player, there's no way you're anywhere near what you can do with that. So, simulclass. that's what we're trying to fact check over here. I feel like it's probably a patented thing, and the reason why a lot of Boogie stuff doesn't get cloned, maybe.
Oh, I see.
I know Randall Smith apparently does love a good patent. What does this say? Here we go. Have a look at this. This is a little thing that I stumbled across. This is on I'm quoting the internet over here. So there's a website called antbooks.com. In the early 1980s, Randall Smith, who was familiar with the concept of extended class A as built by Lloyd Hust, patented a technology called simulclass. One of his goals was to eliminate the crossover distortion that can occur with traditional class A, B.
Right.
You know, kind of called push-pull. I vaguely understand that.
Yeah,
and of that. This is quite a technical description of it in here. So the power amp design was highly successful, and the Mark IV was in steady production for over 19 years. According to the Boogie website, there are 50,000 Mark II, 3, and 4s still in active service. That's an interesting claim. That's a lot of amps.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of believe that in there. So, yeah. Look at this. So, yeah, it is. Basically you can have 6L6s and EL34s in the same amp.
Oh, okay.
I need to try that. I've actually never tried it before. And, you know, another big thing with Boogies throughout the 90s and 2000s are like I guess they were they helped popularize all of this kind of like, you know, multi-watt things and, you know, being able to run your amps at different wattages. And
yeah,
they've really been at the forefront of that. But then, you know, so the Mark IV, it's a proper channel switching amp. So you have like a dedicated clean channel, a dedicated crunch channel, and then your lead channel, and you can kind of set them up. And the Mark V kind of does a slightly different thing. I think it's a bit more like the multi-channel rectos where,
right,
you know, each channel kind of has different modes, which brings us to answering your question finally, where it looks like the new Mark VII, you've got channel 1, 2, and 3, but then you can set each of those to a particular voicing.
Yeah, kind of like
a little.
Yeah, like in a recto sort of thing, right? With the voicing
switches.
Yeah,
very, very much so. I was a little bit disappointed that it doesn't look like you can change the voicing via MIDI or something like that. That would have made it hyper flexible, kind of like a modern version of the tri-axis or something. So
when did so the Mark V, that had MIDI on it, did it?
That I will actually need to check. So, you know, again, we don't want to disseminate any kind of fake information and, you know, end up with a bunch of people angry with us on the internet. But
there's like features like that, because I don't own one and have never owned one. It's a bit kind of like, oh, well, who cares? You know, if someone brings one in for a session, I could care less if it has MIDI on it. But to own one and incorporate it into, even in my current recording rig, like, because I can switch so much with MIDI, if I had an amp sitting there and I could just at the press of a button go to like, you know, whichever channel and bring up a bunch of pedal combinations and stuff, that's actually a pretty useful thing to have. But
big time. I mean, I guess it's one of those things where you could counter and say, well, how many of these sounds do you really need? But at the same time, you know, I guess if you can, these amps have so much switching in them, you know, and
yeah,
I'm sure there's people who have never played Boogies who have seen videos where people are pulling them apart and going, look at how complicated these are. Why is this? It's, you know, stuff there's a lot of complicated switching happening. I'm looking at the back of one at the moment, and I can't see any MIDI jacks on there. So
yeah, I didn't feel like it had MIDI on the previous one. So that's really cool. Like, I think
so. Okay, MIDI Mark V doesn't have that.
Yeah, having that on there and also having the IR loader is really cool. Can you put your own IRs in there? Or is it only the like Mesa Boogie sort of things?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Does it have a USB port on it? On the Mark VII?
Yeah, we'll have to have a look. These are good questions. But it's actually got a reactive load, because obviously there's, you know, the Boogies have had the cab clone, but...
The much maligned cab clone, right?
The much maligned cab clone, a resistive load. And, you know, no reason why you can't get that to sound good. But, you know... I think actually Two Notes make that the cab clone IR. It's just a rebranded Two Notes product on there.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. It's you know, and fair enough. Like, you know, Two Notes, their load box is pretty popular.
I've got one.
You can see why they'd be licensing out their things, or, you know, building stuff like that.
I mean, it just makes so much sense these days. Like, that's the one thing about the synergy that I said last week I used the cabinet emulated output on it, and it was like fine and usable, but it's still, well, okay, maybe debatable, but I still think an IR is the way to go if that's what you're going to put on a product.
I think so, yeah. So there's a USB port on the back, and get this, looking at it, each channel you can select a different cab, and there's 8 cabs.
That's really cool. Really,
so
really
that's kind of cool. It looks like it's got those like the JP2C has really chunky transformers in it, which is cool as well.
Yep.
So you've got a dry line out, and then you've got a headphone out and an XLR direct out on there as well. In terms of speaker taps, you've got, what do you have? 2 4-ohm taps and 2 8-ohm taps, very typical boogie stuff. Send and return, you've got MIDI in, MIDI thrown out. You can set the MIDI channel on the back, and there's a switch on there, which is called bias for EL34 or 6L6. So you can run different tubes in the power section relatively easy, which is pretty cool. And
just while you're on the back page, like you've got the picture of the back, on the page with the picture of the back of the amp. Am I right in thinking a lot of the front panel stuff, like the push pulls, are not there on this amp? And some of it maybe it's moved to the back of the amp, or it just doesn't exist at all? Or
well, okay. So for context, my main experience with this is the Mark IV, and the Mark IV has a bunch of those kind of little rocker switch isn't the right word, but it's a particular type of switch, where it's like you can change lots of stuff on the back, like whether you're running it in what pentode or triode mode for the power tubes. There's mid gain or harmonics mode on the lead channel. There's a bunch of stuff on the back. I actually find it pretty frustrating, especially when it's some stuff where you just want to go from like harmonics to mid gain mode. Yeah, you need to reach around the back of the amp, give the amp the old reach around. So yeah, it looks like there's not that much cab select, which would be set and forget.
Yep.
And then
probably MIDI selectables, all right? Possibly. That's maybe one for the manual.
Maybe one for the manual. And of course, Boogie always do great manuals. So they're looking on the front. You've got, there's reverb. Is it spring reverb, I wonder?
I'm not sure.
I'm trying to look at the back.
It sounded nice, the clip I heard.
I think it's spring reverb. I can see the little cables coming out of the back, but the spec sheet will absolutely tell us that. So no rectifier tubes. You've got 25, 45, or 90 watts channel assignable power scaling. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to use channel 1, I guess for more of like a pushed bluesy kind of thing, you could crank it up and run it at 25 watts and have one of your other channels wide open.
Because there's no master volume, right, for the 3 channels?
Yeah, that's correct. That's also interesting. I can't remember if the JP2C, the Mark IV has a master, basically. Yep. It's kind of cool. So you've got that quick scalability, which, I don't know, that feels like something they probably should have put on there. It doesn't mention reverb on here. Reverb effect, bypass options, tube buffered effects loops. This is all pretty straightforward stuff. It doesn't mention the reverb type. I'm sure it does. I'm just not great at reading through this. So I'm going to say it's probably got spring reverb because that seems just like a thing they would do. But yeah, you can't. So there's 9 modes total, but it's like, they're allocated to different channels on there. So
it's, you set like three modes per channel. You just set the one you want. Bing, bang, boom.
Basically, yeah. And they're talking about this new like Mark 7 mode on there. So, which the buzz that they described it as like in between a Mark and a Recto. So I wonder if it's like a Mark without negative feedback or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Which would be totally doable in something like this. Built-in channel assignable cab clone IR. This is, I've seen some people doing what I'm doing, which is like, it doesn't have master volume. If you just wanted an amp that could pretty much do all the things you need in a modern guitarist workflow, and you love the Boogie sound, then it's spec to the teeth. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. That's, as you say, if you like the Boogie sound, which I do like the Boogie sound, it is a sound. But yeah,
but there's also there's Mark series diehards. It's a cult within the guitar. As much as you have people who like there are different little cults in the kind of overall guitar thing. It's like, treble boosters are this thing.
Oh, yeah.
Which people go mental about. Old plexis are a cult.
Yep.
Mark series amps are a cult. The TC2290 definitely get some culty vibes from people who love those.
Mate, ADA MP1, that's the cult that you and I are both members of.
Oh, look, and the cult you want to join is the ADA MP1 cult because it's definitely the nicest one.
Yeah.
ADA Depot is still one of the nicest places on the internet. So
I don't know what other cult we're a part of. I mean, I guess aren't you like a founding member of the cult of Fractal? Is that you're one of the apostles?
Maybe not a founding member, but
yeah.
I'm a member of the inaugural communist Freemasons of Western Australia. So you can come and join our cult. We've got a lot of ADA MP1s and some pretty good cups of tea available. So yeah. Anyway, this amp it's one of those things where I think if you're building something like this, there is you try to keep everyone happy, so you're going to make a bunch of people not always get what they want.
Yep.
But it looks, anytime Boogie release something kind of new, it's going to be good. But It seems like the Mark series is like, hey, this is once every 2 decades. It's probably going to be the last amp that Randall Smith's involved in designing.
77 apparently.
Yeah. So if this is it, then it's not a bad way to. I mean, I saw this and I wanted one.
Yeah, well, me too. But
like, I need this. Like, I need a bullet in the head. But I just saw it and was like, yeah, that's got a bunch of stuff that would be.
A lot of people would say you need a bullet in the head, Leon.
Well, that is one of the main struggles facing the inaugural communist Freemasons of Western Australia, Troy. So, what can I say? That's for our other podcast.
Well, this amp, in terms of like, as you say, modern features and workflow and sort of stuff, there's nothing missing from this, right? If you like the Boogie sound, there's no reason you wouldn't be happy. And if you like the way it doesn't sound like your old 2C Plus or whatever, use your old 2C Plus. Like, what's the big fucking deal?
It's interesting because channel 3, the voicing choices are Mark II-B.
Mm-hmm.
So Mark II-C Plus and then Mark IV.
Well, there you go. That sounds like, there's going to be a lot of YouTube videos coming up from somebody. I'm actually not pointing the finger at you, but a lot of comparison videos on the horizon between all these amps.
Yeah, it's funny because I laughed to myself and I was like, man, it's a new Boogie with a bunch of new features. Like, how many comparisons are we going to see between this and the 4 and the JP2C and an original C+? The Mark II-B, I've never seen people froth about the way people froth about a 4 and a C+.
Isn't that doesn't have the graphic on it, right? I'm sure there's other...
I can't remember. I feel like maybe Brad Gillis is a noted Mark II-B user. So... Maybe Randall's also just a big Brad Gillis fan and was like, you know what?
I feel like maybe he plays both, but I reckon watching that, listening to one of the Fryette interviews, I'm sure he mentioned Brad Gillis and like using his 2C Plus as like a benchmark for what a good one sounds like.
Yeah, so I think it's probably, the graphic EQ was technically optional on those old Boogies.
Yeah,
so
right.
There's a bunch of Mark II-Cs and stuff like that don't have the graphic EQ, and they don't sell for as much. But
well, you offered one way.
A combo without the graphic, and I bought a Mark IV instead.
Yeah,
and there's again within the cult of the Boogie Mark series, there's some people who much prefer the 4s. So yeah, they all do the thing. I've got a studio preamp too, which is pretty great.
That's a cool. Oh, yeah, that's a cool unit. I'm glad you ended up picking that up. I used to always see them come up and think, oh, man, that would be a nice addition to the studio. But, I was going to say, what's the weight of these amps? Because I can't remember. Are they heavy? They can't be, for their size, they can't be that heavy. For their size, they must be heavy, but like compared to something else,
I wouldn't want to have to walk too far holding it by the handle. 18 kilos. Or 40 pounds for our American listeners.
Bad.
So it's not a Marshall head. And they're compact. I like that. They are very, very nice and compact. So, I mean, for what you get, if you want this kind of thing, then, Boogie are never making another tri-axis. So it's probably the closest thing you're going to get to that in terms of all the modes and things like that. Here's the thing. It's called the Mark VII, so... I immediately want to like that immediately, and it's probably good marketing because you go, "Where's the Mark 6?"
Yep.
You know, like they just had to do something like that, didn't they? You know, and there's the long-awaited Simul 7 leapfrogs its predecessor, the Mark 5, and the secret Mark 6 prototype. I mean, yeah, cool. It's a secret Mark 6 prototype, but it never went to production. You know, this would be like talking about, oh yeah, nah, bro. It's see, Deep Purple Mark III is actually Mark IV because they were just going to do it with Glenn Hughes before Coverdale joined as well. So technically, that's Deep Purple Mark III.
Yeah,
you didn't release anything with it. It's not, you know. So yeah, that was my kind of bugbear there. And I know there's people listening who will just be kind of going, "Shut up, Leon." But also people are like, "Yeah, it's a marketing exercise," because people are going to be like, "Well, there's so much." It's like Boss. They'll never, you know, Boss aren't going to do an SD4, or they never did a DD4. I think that's because 4 is considered unlucky.
Oh yeah,
in Japanese culture. Yeah. So price point in US dollars for this thing, $3,499.
Really? So it's about $6 Australian, probably.
$6 Australian.
That's pretty standard.
Probably.
That's what a Mark's always cost, I think. 5, 6, somewhere around there.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably, I don't know what the JP2C Plus sells.
I reckon
for.
that was 5.5.
Yeah, which is, hey, that's a big chunk of change for an amp. That's just an amp. You know, there's no.
But you know what, man?
What's the combo go for? Let's see, Mark 7 combo, $37.99. Okay, so you could just gig with that, you know, and you're gonna be able to do everything you need to do.
But like
for comparison, the JP2C rack mount is $33.49.
Okay, right. So it's basically in the
comparable.
Same. Yeah. Thing is, like, okay, you and I both love the high gain heads and the boutique stuff. A Soldano here will cost you easily the same, and a Friedman is going to cost you the same. It's like, it's not that.
Exactly. It's not unusual.
Arguably a more versatile amp, to be honest.
Yeah.
But, you know, that in terms of what you want it for / need it for, it appears like it'll be a great tool. I said, you said you wanted one. I would love one.
I'll be interested to see how it trickles down, like, because, you know, they do the Mark. So for comparison, you can get a Mark 5 25 head for $18.99 US, which is a lot less than the Mark 5 head was selling for. So, you know, I'm sure this will trickle down, and, you know, there'll be a Mark 7 25 and stuff like that, which would be a pretty great little gigging amp.
Yeah. You know what? I'm gigging with the 30 watt head at the moment, as you know. I've mentioned it 6 million times. It's probably loud enough, but to be honest, I think if I had the option, I'd probably, for that size, like with that actual physical size head, you probably would just take the extra headroom, right? Like to take the 90 watts. Because you just never know. Like I'm just talking even for clean stuff, not so much for dirty stuff.
I mean, I love the extra oots that you get, you know what I mean? It's just...
Yep.
And it's not the volume difference. It's that when you are in that spot where you're like, cool, I've got to be about this loud, sometimes you need to be a little bit louder and the amp will start to fall apart. But just being able to go, oh yeah, I can just easily scale this up.
Yeah.
Probably a pretty good thing. So, you know, I'm an apologist for Boogie. And, you know, obviously Gibson owns them now, but so I'm sure people will be complaining about the Gib factor on there.
I did see already one post about, I think it was on their Instagram page, like immediately after they released it, someone, you know, made a comment like that. But yeah, all this politics stuff, man, I really do not give two fucks. I love not having to be involved in any of it. Like, I don't take part in any of the discourse. Yeah. Because, yeah, I'm not on like the gear page or any of these sort of things, but I feel like that would just ruin my life.
Oh, 100%. You know, it's, you know, for a website that shares initials with this, there's a lot of things that are probably diametrically opposed to the ethic that I like about gear. There's some absolutely legendary people on there, but I think it's like anything. Once something hits a critical mass, especially with an online forum, then you know it's a race to the bottom. Where, you know, great example is like if you look at the digital modeling section, and it's you know, oh, this thing sounds nothing like the real, like this sounds nothing like a Plexi. Cool. What sort of Plexi do you have? Oh, I've never played one.
Yeah.
But I've heard Van Halen 1, and it's like, yeah, well, there's things going into that whole process. Or, how come I can't sound like Van Halen on my digital modeler? What are you using? Oh, like a Pod XT, So yeah, the
Squire Telecaster.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sure this will go over a lot of people's heads, but again, like so much stuff, this is an amp for like the Mark Series connoisseur. I feel like if there's people out there who already have a Mark IV or a Mark V, they're probably going to buy it anyway. And Boogie knows that, they just know that you're going to do it. They know that, I've got a Mac Studio and I've got a MacBook. Do I need both? Technically, no, but they fulfill particular roles. And once I know how to use one, I know how to use all of them.
Man, I so badly want to update my Mac Mini and my laptop, but just when you need as much RAM as I do, it's a real expensive proposition.
It's easy for me to sit here and be like, oh yeah, they're great, and just buy the base model and have it enough. But there's, maybe Troy, at some point we should start a Patreon for this podcast, and all the money can go towards RAM.
Yeah. Ramcast.
There you go. That was a very cool thing. We've been talking about this a lot, and hopefully people out there, they can let us know how they feel about the Mark series and stuff like that. And it'd be interesting to, sorry to cut you off, but it'd be interesting to me. The other thing as well is it's, I hate the word pure, but it feels like a kind of pure Mark series thing. It's like, I feel like the Rectos, they're like, hey, everyone wants that Recto sound, but then they kind of put stuff like, you can get like a tweed mode, and you can get some really nice clean stuff out of modern rectifiers. But it seems like the Marks, they're just kind of like, they keep them in the very tight parameters of what people want. So yeah, as an aesthetic exercise, I think it's pretty interesting to see how they've structured it.
When you think of the Recto sound, does your mind immediately go to that, like the heavy metal, like high gain distortion thing, or the clean, the pure, super duper Fender type of thing?
For a Recto, I think of somebody playing a...
Mark Series, sorry. Mark Series, not Recto.
Yeah, Mark Series. I was going to say, for a Recto, I think of somebody playing a drop D, sus2 power chord.
Yep.
Just that sound. Like Linkin Park Hybrid Theory.
Yep.
That's the sound. For a Mark, for me, I think of... I just kind of think of like the lead channel, and that, as someone might describe it, as like searing high gain. It's that like very, there's a sort of like percussive ka-chunk that they have, like that super tight low end thing. So yeah, I think less Master of Puppets and more, actually, you know what? I actually probably think of like the kind of, I think of Whitesnake 1987.
Yeah.
I think of John Sykes. Like that kind of very, the lead sounds have like a kind of, they have that vowel-like quality about them.
Yeah, right.
But then, also Metallica and Dream Theater, and I don't really think of the clean stuff, but the cleans are pretty great.
Yeah. I had your Mark IV here for a little bit and played with that a few times because, I more or less left it the way you had it dialed in because previous to that, I didn't really understand how to make it work. There was just like a sensation from a rhythm perspective that was so like tight and big, and I've not experienced that with any other amp. It's a really hard thing to describe, but it's like it was just so clear, but so dirty. And yeah, you said to me when you lent it to me, you're like, man, this is the best amp. Like that was the statement. It's like, here's the Mark IV. It's the best amp.
Pretty much, yeah. I probably still stand by that. It's not the perfect amp for every situation, but it's one of those things where, the other thing, people who like Mark Series amps will tell you, they're like, you have to be on your game when you play one. They're very unforgiving. And that's a cliche with them, but it really, look, they're mostly unforgiving. When you have the fat switch on the lead channel, they're pretty unforgiving. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's like, they're one of those things where I think it's like if you really like playing rhythm guitar, then playing a Mark is a pretty enjoyable experience.
Yep.
There's a lot of articulations that maybe won't come across on, say, like a Recto or a Marshall. there's this thing where it's like, yeah, you only get out what you put in. Whereas like I feel like if you're playing like an old Marshall or something like that, there's this thing where it's voiced in such a particular way where the amp like kind of picks you up and carries you along.
Yeah, right.
Where suddenly you're just like, oh, now I'm playing like this. You know, okay, I'm going to do it. Which, you know, for like playing classic rock or playing 80s metal or something is like actually probably a good thing. It keeps you within a set of parameters that work really well for that style.
Yeah.
Or if you're doing a rock covers gig, a Marshall style thing just works.
Yep.
You know, like makes you, to me, it's like, you know, if anyone's familiar with skateboarding terminology, it's sort of like the difference, or no, you know what, not even skateboarding terminology. You know what it's like? And I use this term when I talk about like hardtails versus like Floyd Roses. You know, like the suspension on your car?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, like the type of bridge you have on your guitar is like the suspension on your car, and something like a Floyd Rose is like having a car that does a lot of bouncing. Like, you know, you're in like a 4-wheel drive or something like that, and you're off-roading. Maybe the comparison would be like power steering. So like, you know, Mark Series amps don't have power steering.
You're right.
Like if you want to turn a corner, like you gotta work hard for it. Whereas I don't know, like something like a Bogner maybe, or like a Friedman, like that's got power steering. That's your power steering amp. It's really easy to kind of drive and things like that. So I don't know how far that analogy goes, but yeah, I mean, Mark Series amps, they're a thing. It's totally fine if people don't get them, but you know, they are like just this very, they're a landmark kind of design for guitar amplifiers. They're really, really interesting. So
there's a lot of cool info out there. I mean, if anyone's keen just to take a bit of time to do some guitar research, which is a fun thing, Mark Series is a nice thing. There's probably a 5-watt world video of the history of Mark Series amps that goes for 30 minutes, for 50 minutes. Just go watch that.
Yeah,
quite fascinating.
And if it doesn't exist, just wait, because there'll probably one that comes out. He did a video recently on like Tony Iommi's guitars, which was, you know, pretty fun. I saw another friend of the podcast, Angus Clark, did some playing on that one, which was like amazing. There's like two people who I've seen who understand Tony Iommi. One of them's Angus and the other is Mark DeVadimo.
Yeah.
And Angus is, you know, a pretty well-known guitar player, does a TSO gig. Mark DeVadimo, probably known for his recorded output of the band Psychonaut from Perth. Legendary dude, maybe one of the funniest human beings I ever know. But
great guy.
And like a great historian of metal. So if Mark's listening to this, we love you, Mark.
Yep. Have to have him on for a chat sometime. Put him on the queue, on the list.
On the long, long list. We will get to some guests soon with this as well.
Yeah, I think it's nice to do some episodes. Yeah, we're just talking, mate. Just having a fat chat.
Just talking about amps and stuff, mate.
Just quickly, did you listen to Backchat today with Michael LaCroix?
I queued it up. I haven't listened to it yet. That's going to be a good one. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Go the Eagles.
Yeah, he told a story about him and JK, like they were apparently celebrating too hard when they would like kick a goal or win a game or something. So Suma pulled him into the office and said, "Boys, you're allowed. Like, I want you to come up with 3 rules for your celebrations because it's too much at the moment." And he reckons they went away and came back and said, "Suma, we got it. We only need 1 rule. When we celebrate, no touching dicks." So
that's amazing.
Just like, yeah, just make sure when they hug, just got to keep them away a little bit.
Just keep them, leave space for Jesus.
Yeah. Anyway,
it's pretty much the same rule as, you know, being in a touring band. You know, it's like, yeah, just keep those away from one another, and everything else will take care of itself.
Well, Leon, just like, do you fully comprehend that the footy season is like 8 days away?
No, and it's going to be a shock. And like every year, the first couple of rounds, I'm just going to be like, oh, that's interesting. But then I'm going to get into it. So this is how it oscillates for me, Troy, because I love checking a website for a score.
Yep.
For example, I can see now that the Marsh Cup final, Western Australia 335 for 4 in the 46th over. Mm-hmm. Just like having that in the background while I'm working, just keeping an eye on the cricket.
Yep.
When footy season begins, when I stop checking the cricket score.
Yeah, right.
I start checking the footy scores. So yeah, it's you know, it's going to be to be an interesting season. How do you think the Eagles will go? Do you reckon they'll jump out of the blocks?
Yeah, I reckon they'll be a lot better than people are giving them credit for. The first game's against North. I just saw North's fullback, Ben Mackay, just went down with injury today. So there's another. If you wanted to make it even easier.
Do you reckon the Eagles could be on 3 wins after the first 5 rounds?
I reckon
they could.
It's possible. I can't remember what the draw's like. Apparently, Freo's got one of the easiest draws imaginable. It's like St Kilda, awesome. North, Gold Coast, something like that. So they should smash.
They'll be powered by the rocker on the roof.
Oh mate, I'll be there. Importantly. 2 weeks away, I guess, for my first game.
So yeah, when's your first gig? Is it in 2 weeks?
Yeah, like the 25th or something.
And do you just 26th? Pick up from where you left off last year? You know,
I think so.
There's no new, angle on anything or new piece of hardware you've got to get to grips with. They're not swinging you out in a crane over the stadium yet.
Oh, look, as far as I'm aware, we'll see what happens. It should be pretty much business as usual, but things can always change. In terms of actual guitar hardware, that may change because I had been gigging with my PRS SE 245. Which I paid $350 for, $360 for actually, Australian.
Ridiculous guitar.
Changed all the bits in it, so it's got a new pickups, Duncan custom and a 59, new bridge on it. New tuners. It's had a bone nut installed on it. I think it's been refretted. Maybe it hasn't been refretted. I can't remember. Anyway, lots of things. Amazing guitar. Tim at MT Guitars plecked it for me, did a great job as always. But that has been my main guitar for that gig because, one, it's got a pink locking strap on it, so it looks really cool.
So good.
But that, I may have said on this before, but I've done that gig with single coil pickups, and there's a lot of noise up on the roof there. Or there was. They changed a few things, and for whatever reason, when they installed a new safety rail thing up there, it meant ended up being a lot more noise induced into the pickup. So that went away when I went back to humbuckers. So that particular guitar, I've just taken it up there for the last couple of seasons. It's been great. It's been the workhorse.
That's the one.
But the last time I played, which was in, September last year? It must have been September. I don't know if the guitar's come out of the case since then. I'm pretty sure it got rained on pretty hard. And it may be in a state when I pull it out of the case. So
it may have a bit of a biosphere associated with it.
So we'll see what happens. But I've got my Charvel, my white Charvel, which I've been playing a lot.
That's exciting.
That might be the one I take up, but I haven't decided yet. And then I've been using my AX8 for the last 4 seasons. And I've got a little Nuex Amp Academy there that I might give a little shot ski and see how that goes.
Yeah, that's exciting.
A bit smaller.
Much smaller.
Yep.
You need one sound for what? 90 seconds, 60 seconds?
30 seconds, mate. 45 30 maybe, seconds. Yeah. Including a bit of feedback intro. So I might chuck that in the bag and see how we go. Because I do actually like the Nuex sounds. I think they're very they just sound like guitar. I mean, that's a phrase you say a lot, and we say together. It sounds like guitar. You know, it's not a fancy thing, but it would do the job.
I think what I like, I think they're probably my favorite sounding out of all the kind of budget modeler lines.
Yeah.
You know, they've got there's a few effects on there which they've nailed, like, the CE chorus and just a few staples on there that seem to work.
Yep.
And in a setting like that, everything's going to sound pretty good.
Yep.
In a setting like that. So
it should be fun. So I haven't played with it enough to really dial the tone in yet. I've just had a bit of a shot on it, but because it's small and easy, might save me one extra piece of thing to take up on the roof there. One thing a little bit lighter. And
do you find that you'd be able to just take a guitar bag that way?
Yep,
wouldn't you?
I have done that in the past with a double guitar bag, just putting the AX8 in one of the guitar pockets, but I didn't really like doing that too much. It just got a bit messy, and I felt like Sorry, go.
I was going to say, because the thing is with that, is like you obviously can't park close to the roof of a stadium. You've got to carry your gear up.
Correct.
Well,
so it's not so bad now.
That's a non-negligible factor.
Yeah, it used to be a real pain because they put in where I play now, it's basically like a semicircle that juts out a few meters in front of the stadium. So, graded floor, I mentioned this the other week, you look straight down and you can just see stadium and people and grass and whatnot. But that's like a tourist attraction, as well as a place that is possible to perform at. Because it's a tourist attraction, they've made the access a little bit easier. So there's like a lift that goes right up to like where I need to play. Previous to that, it was walking around the entire stadium and walking up some very scary. The scariest part was walking up the stairs, to be honest, the grated stairs to the roof access, and then getting up the ladder and stuff. And it took ages. It was like a 10-15 minute walk, and now it's about 3 minutes.
And then you've got to play, after like gripping on for dear life with your hands.
Exactly. So yeah, it's a lot more simplistic now, and I'm still probably not in a situation. To be honest, if I really, really wanted to, I could probably wheel a Marshall stack up there. No one would hear it, but it would look kind of cool. So
yeah, exactly. Oh, that's exciting, man. It's that's when the season begins, when I see old mate Tondi on the TV screen before a Dockers game.
Yep, it should be fun. Hopefully, I get a lot of game time.
Some commentator going, oh, gee, look at this bloke. What's he playing? Bass.
I'll never forget the first time
some guy with who's been concussed 100 times in his life trying to comprehend what music is.
No, I know you know this, but the first time I did that gig, I ended up on the Monday All Access, like the AFL app or the AFL website All Access show. And it was
what was Kane Corn's take on all of it?
No, it was Matthew Lloyd and Jimmy Bartell just giving me shit. Like, oh, look at that guy. He's even plugged in up there. It's like, yes, I am. Thank you very much, Jimmy Bartell.
Yeah, oi. Look, Jimmy Bartell, we get it. You've won a Norm Smith medal. Did he win a Brownlow?
I don't think he did. I wasn't following footy as much back then when Jimmy Bartell was at the peak of his powers. So
yeah, but stay in your lane, mate.
Yeah. Speaking of staying in your lane,
you're good at kicking ball, but you're not good at knowing tone.
Yep.
Maybe he could listen to this podcast and learn a bit more.
Yeah. Speaking of which, tell me about the guitar show, because I haven't heard all about it yet, and I want you to tell me every second, break it down minute by minute.
To be fair, I didn't spend as much time at the guitar show as I had anticipated. I went in very early on Saturday, and it was pretty pleasant. So we got in Friday, and I was over because I did a workshop for Independent Music, who are the Fractal distributor here. So I'd done a workshop at the Margaret River Guitar Show last year on live versus recorded tones. So, it was not the same workshop, but I did a few similar things where I just kind of took my main live preset, I deconstructed it, played a bit, and then I played I looked at, I brought up a few stems of tracks and been like, hey, here's a nice tone, here's a nasty tone.
Can I put a quick pause in? I want to come back to that concept maybe towards the end of this episode, live versus recorded tone, because I have a question for you, but I want you to keep rolling on this first. But just before we leave today, I want to talk about that for a minute, but go on.
Yeah, so Friday I caught up with Andrew, who runs Independent Music, who, I only knew as a voice on the other end of the phone. I've known Andrew for years now, and he's a great dude, just a quality person, like a very, very, very good guitar player and musician, but also kind of just a good dude, like a deep thinker.
Who's better at guitar, him or Jimmy Bartell?
Well, mate, the big gym dog I hear has been working on his chops, and he's been listening to the Gear podcast. So yeah.
What about him or Brendan Archie?
Well, mate, Cheezel, I would love. Could you imagine if we could get Cheezel on this podcast to talk about guitar and what role gear plays in a professional athlete's life?
I don't know.
Because for him, he'd just have a little Strat in his room. That'd be the you've just had to run 100 laps and you're feeling a bit full on, going to play some Chili Peppers.
We should start getting him to do fill-ins for gigs, I love the thought of someone in, I don't know, Germany or something who has no idea what AFL is. Who are these Australians talking about?
I think they should go and check out some AFL highlights and then maybe be introduced to
The sport of kings.
Sport of the gods. Yeah, exactly.
So
guitar show. We're very, very, very distracted, which is why we do this as a podcast. So that's why I was over there. I also did a workshop for Boss. So basically between those two, they covered to fly me out, which was super cool. Anyway, Andrew, great dude. He had 3 of his team down with him who were just like the nicest guys. Chris, Lucas, and Keita. And yeah, like all great players. Lucas in particular was doing all this like chord melody stuff at the booth, first thing, which, you know, when you've just got people on just cranking their favorite Led Zeppelin riffs at 10 in the morning at a guitar show. And then you've got someone who sounds like Ted Green playing like beautiful spread voicings on like, you know, like literally they had it parked on like preset 1 of the Axe FX for most of the gig,
right?
Most of the show. That was really nice. You saw people kind of come up and be like, "Oh, this is like a little oasis." Got to meet a friend of the podcast, Mr. Jason Tong, Head First Dance. Nice. Charles Cilia, someone whose work I've been aware of for a long time. Great guitar builder, rad dude. Ed Lim from Boss, who's one of the nicest people I think I've just ever met, ever, let alone in the music industry. So yeah, it was cool, and I got to chat to Matt Bolt, who is at Electric Factory. They're the PRS distributors. So they let me borrow a guitar for the weekend, which was awesome. They had a 2017 Custom 24 with a piezo, and they set it up for me, and I got the full treatment, mate. They really, really looked after me. So I went on Saturday morning and just kind of met everyone, and it was great. It was just great to, you know, people I only knew from their email signature. I actually got to meet them and like have a chat to them and, you know, just kind of share some stories. And there was a really, really lovely kind of energy. What I liked was every 45, like out of the hour, 45 minutes, people could make as much noise as they like. But then there was a mandatory 15-minute no amps on.
Really?
Like silent time. Yeah, which it needed. It really, really broke it up. It was quite nice.
That's cool.
You know, people could kind of eat their sausage rolls and chicken nuggets in a little bit of peace.
Yep.
Man, one of the most amazing things I saw there was there's a Melbourne guitar player called Simon Hosford. A few years ago, they had done all of Van Halen 1. Like he got a band together, and so the theme for this year was he did all of Trilogy by Yngwie Malmsteen.
Oh, that's sick.
Like with a live band, and they like he just nailed it. Like Yngwie can't play that well anymore.
Yep.
He sounds exactly like 1986 Malmsteen.
Was he wearing leather pants?
So he was not. He was just, you know, it was just guys being dudes.
Oh, mate.
Just
what's
celebrating the music they love.
F. It's like that.
Man. You know, it's kind of like if you're a fan of the collected poetry of Hulk Hogan, you don't have to dress like him to recite it.
Mate, it sounds like playing Racer X on a Maton.
It does. They might have been the same guys doing that.
Well, F is for fail.
He had the proper Strat, and you know, I think a Sir SL68, which sounded Sounded pretty great. Yeah, it was surreal hearing Yngwie but not seeing Yngwie.
Yeah.
You know, the spectacle of Yngwie, I think sometimes can detract a little bit from his mastery of his craft. So this was just very impressive. So yeah, that was kind of a highlight. And then I had my workshops on Sunday. Because I had to get out of there by a certain time, they put me back to back with myself.
Oh, okay.
So I did a Fractal workshop and then took a bunch of questions, and then I did a Boss workshop. They were totally different, like diametrically opposed. One was basically like how I use the Fractal Live, and the Boss one was like how I make a YouTube demo. So just jammed out on the Katana for a bit and showed people my really complicated workflow, which is
Step 1, make a cup of tea. Step 2, pet the cats.
1. Yep. Step 3, do a couple of hip flexor loosening exercises.
Yep.
And step 4, SSD 5, Eurobase, Ozone. You know what else was amazing? Mr. Zen himself actually made it down as well.
Oh, cool.
The mysterious Mr. Zen, whose name shall be concealed from this podcast. But yeah, they just happened to be in town.
Wow.
At the moment, that is a well-kept secret for it has nothing to do with my association of communist Freemasons, but it's just Zen amps in the house, which was pretty cool. So
great YouTube channel, man. I really like what they do.
You know how the Mark Series amps are the best amps?
Yep.
Zen Amps is the best channel about amps.
Yeah. They're just great catalog. I really like what Kyle Bull does for just running lots of different high gain heads and stuff. But yeah, I think Zen's got it pretty, like to be able to have a lot of different guitar players, different types of guitars, vintage stuff, new stuff. Very, very cool. KHE user as well. I'd like to have a chat to that guy about how he runs his amp switches.
KHE user, Little Labs Red Eye user.
Yep.
Just basically, hopefully they come over to Perth at some point and we can all hang out because, we'd all get on very, very well. So, it was just a great hang, you know what I mean? Like really, really cool.
So how many people were at the show?
That's a good question. It was, obviously not as big as something like the NAMM show, but it was considerably bigger than the WA Guitar Festival.
Yep.
It was going off. And everyone there was like, oh, this is actually kind of not as busy as it usually is.
Right.
First one post-COVID. So that was a thing. But yeah, I mean, if you told me there were thousands of people who attended over the weekend, I would not be surprised. It was at Caulfield Racecourse, so pretty big thing.
So would you say as a guitar nerd, is it something I should look at going to next year?
You might enjoy yourself, yeah. I mean, if you went for a day and then had a pretty fat time in Melbourne, you know how you could do it, Tundi? You know how you could do it?
Tell me.
You could go to Melbourne with your family, and you could enjoy yourself for a few days, and then you could you could ditch them, you could palm them off to some banal activity.
Yep.
And then you could go to the guitar show for like 5 hours, and maybe after 3 hours you'd want to leave. But yeah, it's mostly, for me, it was mostly about the people. There was like a bunch of people who watched the channel who came up to me and I had a pretty fat chat to. There was a bunch of, industry people, again, that I only know from their email signatures. So it was kind of nice to, cross some palms, shake some babies, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it was pretty well organized and pretty, like, I reckon I only actually looked at half of the booths while I was there. It was, I just kind of walk up to something and start talking to someone and geek out about it. And I was very pleased that the Boss booth had an OD3 as well. Sort of like late on Saturday, I was like, guys, this is like the biggest secret. Why don't you advertise this? And they all kind of chuckled and they're like, yeah, it's a secret. Have you tried one?
I don't think so.
I just got one, man. Like,
did you do a demo of it the other week?
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like more an amp in a box than an SD1 or something, but I'll loan it to you. I think you'll like it.
Okay. What's the controls on it? Is it just standard sort of
same
drive?
As an SD1?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it's yellow. So, but yeah, it sounds a bit more like a kind of, I don't know, one of those things. Very, 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 very cool. So yeah, like I enjoyed myself. I feel like I enjoyed myself because I kind of didn't overexpose myself.
Right.
One of the funniest things was like Cam and Ryan kind of got there halfway through my second workshop and they were like, we're really sorry, but basically Caulfield Racecourse is huge.
Yep.
They walked past the main entrance and ended up just like somewhere else in some tunnel. And I was coming up on like their tracking thing, like you've broken a new record for number of steps taken in the first couple of hours of the day. So I think they got up and charged around for 40 minutes before they kind of sussed it out and found it. So yeah, I saw a few pretty sweet performances, hung out with some very lovely people. And then, I had to get out of there and go and play some gigs. So I feel like I kind of got to see the best part of it. And I wasn't stuck at a booth, for 12 hours, just getting blasted with noise. The noise factor is insane at something like that.
Yep.
It's cool, but also it's insane. I felt like the independent music stand had it right where you've got that scalability with modelers, or even like the Kemper stand, they weren't too loud. It's kind of like some of the stores where you just got people coming in and turning Marshalls up and, being loud. Yeah. It's inevitable, but yeah, I don't know. You went to NAMM, hey, 2019?
Yeah, 2019 I went to NAMM, which was pretty cool.
How was the sound factor with like every instrument?
It was loud, but it's so big. that I think it's I mean, the sound just kind of is everywhere, but I wouldn't say you can escape it, but I didn't take away the volume. Like, I didn't, like, walking away from it was like, oh, that was the loudest thing I've ever been to in my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I had a really good time. I was in the pro audio section for a little bit, and that was probably more what I was interested in than the guitar stuff. So no, that was cool. I mean, I would like to go back again. You know, the plan was to maybe go back in 2021 before my son turned 2, so that I could get like free flight to, or not for a free flight, but so he could fly for free to America, and I could just send them to Disneyland for a day, and while I go have fun.
Palm it off.
Yeah, exactly. Shirk responsibility, but that didn't happen. And now my kids, well, one of them's 3.5, and the other one turns 2 this year, so that's not on the cards in the near future, but that's okay. But yeah, I don't know. I'm like not the most outgoing when it comes to what did you say about shaking hands or shaking babies and kissing hands and shaking babies?
Yeah, I feel like I go through phases with it where I'm really good at it some days, and other days I just want to not deal with it.
Yeah.
Like if I go to a gig, you know, I feel like that's when I'm peak ham. Like I feel like over a decade of touring has sort of taught me how to like wiggle my way backstage, or you know, chat to you know, like that kind of thing. Whereas yeah, sometimes if it's I remember I was at the Boston Amp show, and you know, kind of like I walked into the Electro Harmonics booth, and the demo guy just gave me nothing. I just sort of sat there and like watched him play for 5 minutes. And he just didn't stop. He didn't say like, hey, how are you? What's going on? You know, a few other people were a lot better about that, where they say like, oh, hey, how's it going? They'd hear my accent. They'd be like, whoa, where are you from? And, you know, then you've got it in.
Yep.
But EHX guy just kind of fuzzed on through. Good on him, you know? Yeah.
There were some cool people I met at the NAMM show. That same deal, like, oh, you're Australian. Tell me more, you know? A couple of people that knew what Perth was.
Yep.
So that was cool.
Probably been there with the Navy or something like that. So.
Yeah. So that was quite nice, but as I said, I'm just not the most. I tend to just, I don't walk into a booth and immediately like strike up a conversation and get like a lot of cards and add everybody on Facebook. I'm not saying that's what you do either. Just saying that's not the way that I like really feel that comfortable. So that's the one downside of a conference thing like that.
Yeah, and I think most, you know, I feel for the people who are there because of their job, where you know. Their day is just dealing with a bunch of swinging dicks.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, yeah, mate, cool. I've seen somebody play the latest Animals as Leaders song 6 times today. So good on you. Are you interested in any of this, or are you just looking for some praise and attention or free stuff? Because we don't have any of that to go around. So
yeah,
I kind of definitely sympathize with people there. But yeah, I mean, I got looked after, you know, and it was a little bit surreal to see your name up there with a bunch of kind of people who I guess kind of followed and respected for a long time. So yeah, and I had a great excuse to wrap conversations up. So like, I gotta go and play a gig.
Yep. And the gigs were good?
Gigs were good, yeah. So we did Northcote Social Club, which the last time we were there, everyone was like, you guys should do Northcote Social Club. It's about the right size room for us as well.
Right.
Sound guy was pretty good. He was pretty full on, but also just kind of, you know, communicated pretty well and was very open to what we were doing. And, you know, everyone I spoke to who heard it out front had a really good time. I developed a new technique, Troy, for hesitant crowds.
Oh, yeah?
I call it sheepdogging. So what you do is during the song, you want the crowd to move to the front. What you do is you just, with a wireless, you run out into the crowd and you start running behind people, telling them to move forward while you're playing, which I did. So that was pretty funny.
All right. Well, I have a wireless on my rig. So, hey, on that note, so you know, Leon, like whenever we do all the small things at a cover gig, and it gets into that bridge section, where it just goes down to like the little palm mute chug stuff, and you go, Aussie, Aussie, Aussie.
Yep, the best part.
Yeah, I do that sometimes when the crowd's right. If it's a busy crowd and you're going to get the feedback from it, It's really fun. I did it at the at my gig on Sunday night, and there was a lot. It was busy. It was a like day before a public holiday, busy, going off. Did it, got absolutely nothing. It was awkward. It was very uncomfortable. It's the worst that's ever happened at a gig for me.
See, that's where you need a pre-sheepdog before that. It wouldn't work. Some crowds just, they're not going to give it to you like that. But there were a few people there who kind of knew all the words to the songs. So
yep.
That's when you know they're ripe for a sheepdog. And
do you think they know how to lift?
I think some of them definitely knew how to lift. There was a couple there who were having the time of their life. Like, I don't enjoy our gigs that much. And the dude there was like, man, I went to give this guy a hug after the gig, and he was just one of the, like, I think his lats were wider than my chest.
Right.
And it turns out he was a buddy of Jason's. And Jason was saying like, oh yeah, that guy lifts a lot. So for anyone uninitiated, there's a Ragdoll song called Break You, where there's the line, she wants to know if you even lift. Wants to know if you even lift. Yeah. So some people definitely got that. But yeah, it was good. It was that
was 10 years ago we did that, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Anyway,
what a decade it's been.
Yeah.
A decade of degradation. Yeah, there were a few people who didn't come down the last time because they were sick, and I hadn't heard from them. Like, I'd messaged a few people and said like, hey, you're coming out, let me know, and got nothing, but they all kind of showed up. My favorite moment was, we're in Northcote, which has a pretty bustling, restaurants everywhere, anyone who's familiar with Melbourne. And we ran into some friends and we were chatting away to them. Kind of like, you got the front of the restaurant, then the road, then like the outdoor seating. Mm-hmm. And we sort of all congregated, and I was sort of like, I was getting that feeling like, I feel like we're like maybe encroaching on the people sitting here. I hope we don't annoy any of them. And this one guy just starts going, hey, yeah. And I was like, I actually had the moment of like, oh no, we've made someone in Melbourne really, really angry. And it actually turns out it was our mate, Ant, who is like I guess he's probably 6'4", 6'5" Croatian guy. From a band called Warbirds, who I think if you like Ragdoll, you probably like Warbirds. Check them out. But yeah, he just kind of did that and then turned around and saw him, and with this massive cheeky grin on his face. Him and his wife just happened to be having dinner at the exact spot there. So yeah, that was kind of cool. I really enjoyed the show. The guys really enjoyed the show as well. It sort of all came off pretty well. And then we did a really small bar called Whole Lot of Love on Sunday afternoon, which was more of just, well, we're in town, we may as well just do something. So we just did a set there. And again, that was more like, hey, if you couldn't make Saturday, come and hang out, and, very, very relaxed. Then we went and saw Striper and got an education in rock music.
Yep. Did you get a Bible?
I didn't. I really wanted to get one. I didn't realize they print like it's a Striper Bible, not just, I thought they were just throwing out generic Bibles.
Yeah. No, Striper branded Bible would be a pretty cool souvenir. Yep. Hey, before we wrap it up, can I just ask you a little question to do there, mate?
Of course. This is Q&A time.
Well, you're talking about the like live versus recorded sound, right?
Yes.
So with like low end in your presets for live versus presets for recording, or in general, how are you dealing with that? Because I'm finding that in my studio, I'm doing a lot of, I've always done this, right? Maybe keep the bass a little bit low because it appears to me that it gets a bit boomy sounding. Maybe I'll put a little high pass filter on as well, 80 hertz, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, depending on the situation. Take it to a gig, and it's just at the volume I'm playing at being so quiet, it's just, there's nothing there. And I'm wondering with you, do you account for that in your presets? That's question one. Do you tweak the preset when you're at a gig very often? That would be question two. If you do tweak it, would you tweak it on the Fractal, or would you tweak it at the desk position? To what it is to me, it's almost like, how smaller like entry-level amps have like the bass boost switch? Yep. It's kind of like, this is probably just because of some of the gigs that I play when it is such a quiet volume because of the environment, like playing at the back of a bar or something like that, or like a Not like a rock bar. I'm talking like there's people having like quiet drinks and you're just background noise.
Squid rings.
It's a squid rings sort of situation. It's kind of like, I mean, maybe I just need to have a bunch of presets that just accommodate that. But yeah, I was just curious to hear your thoughts on that, like how you would deal with the low end in that situation. And I do know you've said before, like when you're dialing presets, do it at gig volume. And I think that's really, really good advice. But it's funny because sometimes the gig volume is like half the volume of what you think it's going to be.
There's definitely a point where you get to where it's just never going to sound good. You know, it's either, and that's the super quiet or the super loud, you know. Like we did a gig a couple of weeks ago where our booking agent came down and just kept telling us to turn it up.
Yep.
And then everyone I spoke to after the gig was like, that was one of the loudest things I've ever heard. So, you know, that was probably that's bad loud. And then I've done, you know, obviously plenty of gigs where you just can't get your guitar sound to work because there's no volume. I do like the 80 hertz-ish high pass, low cut. And then, you know, there's different schools of thought. I know I was reading something with Justin York where he was talking about, you know, how they set up their Axe effects with Paramore. He was like, we never use a high cut on it because that's sort of like the sparkle, like you want that extra top end in there, which I've kind of had the opposite experience with. Like I normally run a low pass at about 6.5K with a fairly steep kind of filter slope to take out too much like annoying sizzle. So yeah, I always have a parametric EQ in the Fractal presets and a few like, you know, like really tight surgical cuts around like 3.5, 4K and maybe 5K.
Yep.
Depending on the IR that you're using or depending on the cab. So that and multi-band compression,
right.
Just like basically the Andy Sneap trick that he uses in a mix.
Oh, yeah.
Which kind of makes more sense on a bus, where you're going to have that build up of low end. But for me,
I do that a lot
like
with recording. Yeah, but I don't. I never really think of that with like a live tone sort of thing. But
I think it's just for me because it's like with the, you know, as you know, with the ragdoll stuff, it's either like I'm either playing like a chord that's the low 3 strings as a power chord or a 9 with the top 2 strings or like an open string or some like thing where you've got, you know, a power chord plus an extra note on the top. Yeah. So you need a bit of detail. So you need that like just wide open thing, or it's a run dun dun kind of chug a chug. So that's kind of how I get around any, like just taming the boominess of it.
Yep.
Anything else, I just let the sound guy do. They, you know, when I first got a Fractal, I would always speak to the sound guy or the monitor engineers and say, hey, what could I change to this to make it easier? And they might say it's a bit bright sound. Like, you know, first gig I ever did with it, they were like, oh, there was too much 4K in it. Like pull a bit of that down, dial in your amp. I remember a few years ago, we did a gig in Sydney and the sound guy was like, oh yeah, it's like, you know, where's the presence control on your amp? And I was like, oh, the amp models, it's like at 5. He's like, just turn it down a bit. And I think I turned it down to about 1 on the Mark model. Yep. He was like, yeah, that's perfect. Like that was the only thing I was fighting a little bit. So yeah, it was interesting on Saturday. We played in stereo because it was a decent sized room. So pitch detune went straight on. But the sound guy, he was saying, he's like, oh, I'm just going to play with the stereo image a little bit. He said, because I've got you hard left and hard right. And it just sounds, it's like a bit too wide sounding. So I think he said he panned it like maybe 40, 50 left and right. And it sort of just had a little bit more
cohesion,
chunk in there. Yeah, which is, you know, it's, I'm sure you go through this a lot. It's easy to forget that stereo doesn't mean left, right, center.
Yeah.
There is a continuum in there. So yeah, for the low end, just, you know, honestly, I think I worry, or not worry, I think it's more like getting the mids right for a live guitar sound.
Right.
Because I was kind of saying to Jason, you know, we were talking about like plexis, and when you play a plexi, you're like, oh, that's just the mids are perfect for rock music, you know, whether that's because they were just the amps everyone used but you know, it's like if you move that tone stack frequency up a few hundred hertz or down a few hundred hertz, it starts to sound weird.
Yep. That's well, I'd be curious to see how that
goes with like the Splawn, because the Splawns get that weird mid sort of thing in it. Maybe that's
I wonder if that's kind of a thing. So yeah, basically, if I've got the multiband, I just use it as that kind of like chug a chug, like a very subtle thing to just bring that down a bit, but mostly just high pass.
Yeah.
And it's an iterative thing over every gig. You just kind of, I feel like I struggle more doing a cover gig nowadays and getting the sound right for that than I do with the ragdoll stuff, because it's so dialed. Like I know what Cam's snare sounds like. I know what Ryan's Sans amp bass guitar sounds like.
I mean, that's my situation. I mean, as you know, it's just doing the covers and trying to make it sit. And doing with the HX Stomp 2, which is a different beast, not altogether, but it certainly has its own quirks and good and bad things about it. So, sorry, what were you going to say?
The Fractal's like, I was just going to say, like, the thing I like is, I try to stick to the Fractal to the kind of amps that I know in the real world as well, that I've used, and that I know you set them a certain way, like the Mark Series amps, or, like a modern Marshall or something. It's, you kind of put the knobs as a starting point. I found with the HX that the pot tapers are, in some cases, very unlike the real amps. In some cases, pretty good.
That's what I was going to say. Like, I don't actually know how they model their amps. Like, I know with let's say a Mark Series amp, right? The signal, not the signal flow, the circuit has been effectively digitally recreated, right?
Correct.
Via all the values, right? So if you set the bass knob at 1 versus 5, it's effectively what it's going to be like in the real world. So in terms of the Helix stuff, they haven't modeled the same way, have they? Do you know?
I've read a bunch of stuff where people are like, you need to do this with a master volume and you need to do this, and so I imagine it is component based modeling, but
it is okay.
But I'm sure there's also, I know the kind of the thinking there is, it's like, hey, we're just going to encourage people to put it where it sounds good. The issue that I have with that, and why I am a little bit more of a kind of like staunch defender of accuracy, is that a lot of the people who are going to be using that product are using it as a solution or as a way to streamline their existing rig. So they're coming in with preconceptions. It's sort of like, if that sounds maybe a bit snobby, imagine I handed somebody a guitar with a wound G string on it.
Yeah, right.
And said, go on, do a gig. Your existing preconception is that an electric guitar has an unwound G string on it, and that lets you do things. But, if you're going to play 50s rock and roll, bro, like, you got to have that wound G. Or you want to play status quo, you need that wound G. But kind of outside of that, it's, give me the plain G string so that I can do some bends.
You love a plain G string.
Just nice and plain, mate.
That's
all we need.
Also, maybe last thing, because I watched the what's his name? German bald guy, HP 42. Enning, yeah, that guy. Because he did a really cool video of the Tonex, but he went on some massive rants about how doesn't matter what this amp is. I'm not going to tell you what this amp is that I've modeled. You just use your ears and like use the description. Big hairy shred guitar and stuff. Amp. To which I was like, okay, I kind of understand where you're coming from, but like sometimes, if I'm in a studio and I need to get the sound of like an AC30, I would just like to call up the amp that says AC30, because that's the solution that I need. I don't want to have to go through like...
I don't want to look up Bojangles the Mouse.
Yeah, it's just...
Or a preset called The Green Mile. You don't want to have to like, oh, that makes sense. That's a funny joke.
Yeah. And it's like, and also, model your own amps and stuff. It's like, I have a lot of cool amps and I'm really happy with them, but not everybody has my amp collection. So, and not everyone has the opportunity to try Soldanos and Bogners and da-da-da.
Yeah.
So just like, if you want to hear one, it's just fun to play through these amps. Like, there's no problem with just like calling up the thing. That's a different rant. Sorry. I just...
Yeah. That's an interesting one for a future episode, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fun one, Uncle Leon. I feel like I've learnt some stuff.
Yeah. All in on the Mark Series stuff.
Go buy one. Just go buy one right now. When do they come out? Like, when are they in shops,
Well, here's the other thing. When's Australia going to get any stock?
Yeah,
and where's it going to go? So that'll be...
well, probably... Who's the messer?
the ones that used to be in Eastwick Park. You know the ones.
Music Park.
Music Park. I'm sure they sell a lot of messes. So when they get
Lee.
Lee.
Lee will know. We'll hit him up. He's a good dude.
Should we go try one out when they get here? We'll go and put a towel down.
Because we did that with the Mark V. Can you remember that? We went to Music Park
and
played a Mark V.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, mate. Well,
and I was like, I don't get it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until that amp day we had when someone bought in a Mark V and had it dialed in, and we were like, oh my God.
This is what it is.
Yep.
It's so funny. I mean, like,
phenomenal. At
the end of the day, Leon, like, you and I just don't know anything.
Well,
we know
I would not disagree with that. It's, in the words of Bill Todd, mate, like, there are those who know they know, they're the top tier, the cream. There's those who know they don't know. Those people are kind of, they're kind of honorable, and you can work on that. People who don't know that they know, you got to help cultivate those people. But the dangerous ones are the people who don't know that they don't know.
Yep.
So, at least we know that we don't know.
Yeah, that's true. We know we don't know. No, I think
maybe we actually don't know that we don't know, and we are the dangerous ones.
I think, to be fair, we know a lot more now than we did 10 years ago. When
it's continuous learning. That's why we're here.
Yeah,
that's what it's all about, and why you should continue to support this podcast and subscribe. Leave us a 5-star review, and
tell your friends.
Thank everybody so far tell your friends. We thank everybody who's listened so far, and if you're in Australia, keep an eye out for all the Freo Dockers games where you see Troy playing on the roof of Optus Stadium.
Yeah, keep an eye out for all the West Coast Eagles games to watch. Watch a vast improvement over last year's performance.
Calm, boys.
And I guess till next week, we'll peace out, hey?